Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Sara Murdock, and I beat the often path by not having imposter syndrome. I'm actually ridiculously not afraid of anything, probably because I know my own fallibility and I know I'm kind of an idiot, and I'm fine with that. And I just do the best that I can with the time that I'm given.
Welcome to the show, Sara. I like that you say that you're an idiot because I'm also an idiot, which is very clear for anybody who's listened to a few of these episodes. So this episode will just be two idiots shooting the breeze about nonsense. And, if you want to say hi, Mom, now's the time, in case your mom will be listening to this. Mine gave up on me.
I don't think my mom knows how to. Yeah, mine doesn't know how to listen to podcasts, so she'll probably never hear this.
Are you still being creative out there? Anyways, so tell everybody a little bit about your personal journey, your career journey. How did you end up where you are, and what is unusual about your road to your current career?
Thank you. And one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you is because you are so obsessed with stories. And I just absolutely love that. And I think one of the things that makes me a little weird, certainly, is that I'm way more interested in sort of the story and the path and the process than I am in any particular, outcome. And I know it's really cheesy and kind of cliche to say I'm not afraid of things, but it's I don't remember to be afraid because I'm just so in love with the process that I'm just kind of in it. And from time to time, I'll stop and look down off the proverbial cliff and be like, should I be afraid of this height? I think I'm good. And just kind of keep going. And that seems to be working for me, at least, in almost 4 decades of existing. So here we are.
Do you have moments of sheer terror looking over the edge of the cliff? Do you have moments where you say, oh my God, what am I doing? Because I do. That was really personal. Oh my God, yes. Are you kidding me?
That probably makes you a little more normal. I think I might be a little abnormal in that way. I just don't take myself very seriously. I take my work really seriously. And I think that helps me. I don't feel like I have a possible fall from grace, right? I'm just not that precious, right? I'm just one little creature out of 8 billion walking around this rock tumbling through space, I'm just trying to do the best that I can,
That's a very healthy attitude. And sometimes I have that attitude, but then sometimes I'm like, why are you trying to make a comedy show about serious things? What are you doing? Anyways, let's get into it. So what is your current career? What do you do for work?
What do I do for work? So what would the kids say these days? I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consultant, right? That's my day job, if you will. I identify, I guess my self moniker is I'm an entrepreneur, right? I build projects that I believe are reflective of what executives, companies, and just the general population needs when it comes to people and culture ethics. That's really the overarching objective. If I see a need, how do I show up and meet that need as best that I can, assuming that in the next season or two, it's going to morph all over again, right? And there's going to be a slightly different need. So yeah, a lot of real-time education, learning and development, coaching, launching a cohort model soon, an accelerator program. I'm a builder. I envision things, and I work with incredibly brilliant people all over the world. I think I was telling you before, got London and Mumbai and, New York, certainly. And, somebody in Amsterdam who are looking at, somebody in Ghana who are looking at, et cetera. So, different perspectives in terms of worldviews, in terms of geographies, in terms of cultures, in terms of areas of expertise. The thing that definitely binds us together is we're very obsessed with collaboration, and we're very obsessed with sort of a systems thinking model.
Okay, you said a lot of words in there, many of which sounded great. I unfortunately can't remember them all. I want to say diversity, inclusion, equity, and what was the fourth one?
Belonging.
And belonging. Okay.
That one's the new kid on the block. Yeah.
Okay, so to whom do you teach these things, and in what context?
Great questions. Thank you for reining me in a little bit. Appreciate it.
I just am a hopelessly ignorant soul trying to make sense out of this world.
It's working for you. So keep being hopelessly ignorant. Um, Mostly to executives. We definitely work with sort of larger employee teams as well. It's not about like, oh, we're, too good to work with entry-level employees. It's not that. It's that if we're honest, most companies allocate the vast majority of their learning and development sort of just hours and like resources to higher up execs. I would actually suggest that more companies should extend that privilege to more folks on their team. But yeah, it usually tends to be sort of, C-suite, boards of directors, sometimes more like, kind of like director, managerial level. I will say the one thing that's nice about working with folks kind of at that echelon, if you will, is that they do tend to be like extremely driven, like very focused people. So in the time that you have them, often, not always, of course, there's exceptions to this, but like oftentimes those folks are very, very like present, really want to get the most out of the time. And that's, rewarding for me and for our team. So.
Sure. So describe then the problem. What is the problem, broadly speaking, that you solve?
Totally. So it does depend who you're talking to. Some folks will have some kind of like ethical or PR catastrophe, right? There's an acute issue, there's a pain point, and they'll bring in a consultant or a team to help them kind of navigate the stickiness, right? They're like, we don't know what we're doing. We thought we were on the right track. This thing happened. We don't really know how to address it. Oftentimes, folks are way more sort of nascent or like undeveloped, you might say, in their kind of people and culture, just part of their business than they think they are. And there'll just be like a little bit of a rude awakening, it's there's nothing quite like a minor catastrophe to like wake people up to a need to change. It's maybe like having a bit of a health emergency and being like, oh, perhaps I should start exercising,
Yes.
Yeah, so that's fairly common. But I will say these days, you get more people who really want to be ethical leaders and more people who ask, like, what impact are we having? Like, are we, ethically interacting with our team, with the people who are actually comprising this company, as well as, asking, like, what's our larger kind of impact out in the world, whether it's through the actual products that they're shipping or whether it's simply, as being a model for other folks in their industry, et cetera.
And before we go into that, you're a doctor. What is your doctorate in?
I am a doctor. Social impact, which, again, that term doesn't mean that much. It's like, what the hell are we talking about here? My question when I went through all of my research was, how do we help programmatic leaders understand the division between their vision and their outcome? So like the impact to me is, it's very much about like your affect, right? Like what your actual influence is. What is your gravitational pull? What is the, footprint that you're leaving? Because as we all know, for better and for worse, intentions are kind of meaningless, right? Like what actually matters is the lived experience of the people who work for you, the lived experience of your consumers. And for that matter, these days, I think people are waking up to the fact that the lived experience of like larger communities and, nations and international networks, et cetera, like we're all connected and there's sort of no getting away from understanding impact these days.
That's so true. In a previous life, I was also a doctor. I was a doctor of funk. I prescribed funk to people, but I've been stripped of that title these days. That was many lifetimes ago. Just kidding. I'm completely unqualified. We can hook you up with
an honorary doctorate of
oh my God.
Or something.
That would be the ultimate crowning achievement of my whole life. An honorary doctorate is the best I can hope for. Doctor of letters
of
or something. Yeah, of grooviness would be fantastic. I will take that any day. So the word ethical, just like the word morality, which is an interesting thing that I've noticed because I have branded myself as an ethical marketer because I believe as people who are able to amplify stories, I think we have a moral, ethical responsibility to amplify the right kinds of stories. And the obvious cliche example of what the wrong kinds of stories would be like marketing for cigarettes or gambling or things that are just demonstrably harmful. And between cigarettes and, wind turbines, there's this whole spectrum from bad to good. Some things are kind of gray, murky. Some things are more bad than good, but few things are black and white. So what I've noticed is that people tend to have a weird reaction to words like ethical or moral because for so long, organized religion has somehow laid claim to these terms, which I don't agree with. I don't think you need to be religious to be moral or ethical. I think it's more about the reasons behind why you make a decision. And I also think that going back to first principles, morality and ethics are in our own best interest because, why don't we murder somebody? Well, we don't want somebody else to murder us. And if we extend that principle, the golden rule, if you will, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, I think that is a foundation for ethics and morality. What do you consider to be an ethical business operation, and what would you consider to be unethical in your line of work?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing that came to mind while you were speaking is that to me, the sort of do unto others as you would have them do unto you principle is extremely conditional and like extremely transactive. And I'm basically obsessed with leadership. Like that's kind of where my drive to get into ethics comes from. So I'm like, all right, for me, if I'm going to be the best leader that I possibly can be, how do I do that in a way that is both nurturing to myself, so I'm not like bleeding myself dry, but at the same time, it's about like giving and offering as much as I reasonably can. And so I really subscribe to like the whole, servant leadership sort of philosophy, if you will. And I think where people maybe get like contracted about ethics is when they think that they're going to have to sacrifice something. And I do not see that. I actually like fundamentally disagree with that principle. I think that to be a really like bold, shining leader, you're not like play acting at being a good boy or a good girl or a good person, however you want to phrase that. Like you simply are an embodiment of giving and you're like living in an ultimate joy because of that. So I really see it as like a stance. And a lot of the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging work that I do is built around allyship. And that's because I don't see it as like being correct politically or like being woke enough or demonstrating this and that. It's like to be an ally, you are embodying somebody who like walks beside the other. Because again, like we're all in this together. Like we're literally all screwing ourselves over. Like I'm screwing myself over if I don't like live in that way. So that's sort of how I orient myself to the work.
And how would you define allyship? I mean, you kind of gave a little bit of a example there, but let's go into that a bit more. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't really see it as being about like holding up a particular demographic for the sake of holding up that demographic. Like as somebody who identifies and presents as a white person, if I go out and like find a woman of color to like lift, like that's weird and tokenizing. You know what I mean? Like I'm doing that to make myself feel better, or to be like, oh, I'm part of a anti-racism solution or something. Like that's really about me at the end of the day. But if I can ask questions about, what is my program serving? Who is my program serving? What, belief structures, or to your point about stories, like what narratives are we holding up or what narratives are we maybe questioning? Like that to me is way more potent than like, I don't know, like I'm a good girl. I donated to NAACP. Like, please give me a gold star, and I'm not saying like, don't make a donation. Sure. If you have the means, please make a donation. Like, absolutely. It's not about like cancel culture and canceling that out. It's saying like, who am I fundamentally like seeing myself as? And then like, how do I show up in that in all the little subtle ways on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis? I think that's way more powerful than like one big gesture, once a year or something.
Yes, I completely agree. That's very similar to what I believe in my own life and demonstrating priorities. And of course, I have long believed that we're all one and that the boundaries that separate us are imaginary and arbitrary. And I think anybody who has traveled extensively will know that. I've lived in a foreign country for 8 years where I didn't speak the language. I have known what it was like to be a minority of sorts. And if you travel around, you recognize the connections that we all have. I've traveled crazy places, been to China, been to Australia, I've been to Peru, I've been to Costa Rica. I've been all over Europe. I've been in a bunch of places. And every time I travel, I'm struck by the fact that everybody is generally basically the same. The hospitality around the world is always great. People always want to give you food and talk about their local dishes and their local drinks. And so I think travel is one of those beautiful things that just broadens your horizons by doing it. And you just start to see those connections. But I do want to kind of touch on something that I just love the phrase of PR catastrophe. You said there's a minor PR catastrophe. Give us an example, obviously not naming names, of what a minor PR catastrophe might be in your line of work.
Yeah. So a couple things come to mind. One issue is that I find many companies and organizations accidentally put their branding, I guess. Yeah, just their PR ahead of what they're actually doing internally. And I mean, unfortunately, that's most companies I worked with, I would even go so far as to say. So that also means that because there's a disconnect between the presentation and the, again, sort of like embodiment or like who they are as an org, it's very easy to sort of let slip that there's a desire to like appear altruistic when maybe that's not actually happening internally. So it's not so much that listen, I'm a huge fan of people like tooting their own horns when something's going well. I'm not saying that you shouldn't like lovingly brag about your people or, lift folks up. Like, please, like celebrate people. Absolutely. But if you lead with like, hey, market, look how awesome we are. And that's sort of the first step that you take. It's almost inevitable that like eventually you're, what's that old tale about like the emperor's new clothes or whatever. Like it's going to become clear that you're just sort of like riding bareback on a donkey. You know what I mean?
Right. And in this internet age, everything's transparent more so than ever. You have to walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk.
For sure. And, I can't prove this. This is more just observational than like academic research, but I've noticed, and I've talked to other colleagues who feel similarly, that it almost seems to be worse in like the nonprofit sector or like, social impact organizations where people have decided already, like, I'm a good person, I'm doing good things, therefore, like, I don't need to learn or grow. And to me, the issue comes in not from like, it's not about being perfect. It's like, if you think you're sort of good to go and you don't have anything to learn, it's almost more inevitable that like you're just going to be blind to all the places that you do need to grow. I didn't phrase that very well, but you probably take what I'm saying there.
By the time this episode airs, it will have been many weeks ago. But as we're talking, my guest today for World Toilet Day, Isabel Medem, she talked about that a lot, about the problems with social entrepreneurship as a whole and the celebratory nature of putting these social entrepreneurs on a pedestal oftentimes without really, you have these award shows and these galas, but you're not actually celebrating the cause or really caring about the cause. It's just a pat on the back.
Pat on the back.
But how did you get into this line of work? What was the career path that brought you there?
Yeah. So, as I shared with you a little bit before, I actually started out in the performing arts. This was, decades ago, right? And I really began with sort of envisioning like a performance work, right? So I got very hooked on the process of imagining like an evening length show, for example, and kind of building that up from scratch. So little did I know at the time, I was like already falling in love with entrepreneurship and like falling in love with what does it mean to tell a story that instead of instructing people, you should behave in this way, it's like opening up a narrative and saying like, hey, here are some characters and protagonists and thoughts and questions and theses to like ponder and chew on. Here's what I've created. I hope you like it, and I think that kind of planted a lot of those seeds for me very, very early on. I did work, quite a bit in community settings. I was doing, intergroup dialogue before I knew what that was called. A great example of, I was quite young at that point in time, and it didn't occur to me to like be nervous because I was just sort of so, in love with the work. I noticed a lot, this was in the greater Seattle area at this point in time, I noticed a lot of NIMBYism, so not in my backyard, with, recent immigrant communities and, folks of sort of lower socioeconomic status. And yeah, helped quite a few sort of businesses and community leaders kind of work through some of the fear of like, what does it mean to kind of invite in the other? Not that that is a real thing, but like that concept of the other,
Yes.
like xenophobia, essentially.
Right.
Yeah, and that really, I wasn't thinking I'm a DEI expert. Like that wasn't going through my head at all. I just really wanted to help people learn to communicate more effectively and learn to like embrace dynamic tension as an opportunity for the community rather than like a thing to be afraid of.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think I just learned a lot about myself as somebody who maybe appreciates moments of productive tension as I think of them and sees them as, real like growth opportunities and real ways for people to actually work through some of what can be superficiality.
Yes.
It's sort of easy to like shake someone, oh, nice to meet you, and then you go about your day. Whereas actually if there's like something to work through, if there's some tension there, oftentimes that can result in like more meaning at the end of the day. So that's a lot of what just sort of hooked me on this type of work. And also just gave me a sense that like, hey, I'm pretty good at like emotional labor, for example, and I'm pretty good at holding space for other people's fear and anxiety and confusion and whatnot. And that's a lot of the work that I do. It's not like, here, have the correct answer, now you're fixed. It's like, hey, you seem to be having some confusion about this. Let's like work through that.
So true. Have you by chance read the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg?
It's actually been a long time, but yeah,
Yeah, well,
I know.
you'll still retain. It's a relatively simple principle, I think,
Yeah,
what you retain. But
yeah,
that book I read some years ago, and that was my well, it's a great introduction to how to communicate with groups of people who apparently disagree. I found that to be very fascinating, and
yeah.
the idea of needs-based communication, and instead of having an
Mm,
adversarial relationship with two groups, just focusing on needs, the language of needs. What do I need from this? The other group saying, what do I
for
need from this?
sure.
That was a
Yeah.
very eye-opening book. And if you've listened to the audiobook of it, it's very hilarious. It's very gentle, and it's got like new agey guitar in between the chapters. It's exactly the way you would imagine a book like that would be read.
That's
But
pretty
but
funny.
cool. So you felt that you had a knack for this kind of work. How did you begin to turn it into a profession, to your main profession?
Yeah, no, totally. I was not looking to get into like advisory or consultancy or anything like that. I fell in love with education. I was, teaching college and grad school for a number of years, which was not planned, if I'm completely honest. Like I kept being asked to teach classes because I enjoyed it and I was good at it. And little pat on the old back there. Like I would get glowing student reviews. So they were like, let's have her back. So during that period of time, I ended up on a project basis, kind of just working with a number of, again, leaders and executives and things like that because of needs that they had, and I loved the work. And, by and large, I think they really enjoyed working with me, partially because as you can tell, I don't know, like I care, but I try to come with like a joy and a curiosity. And I think people really respond to that. I think that's, yeah, like people enjoy working in that way. So that just sort of built momentum, if I'm completely honest. And I ended up, then sort of working more formally with a number of, different projects and execs and things like that. I worked with a couple different startups for a while, helping them kind of hone in on their visions and their strategies and things. And I've also got I think I told you this before too, a master's in organizational design. I am, as free form as I am, I'm like really, really good at building strategic teams, like really good. And that surprised me. Like I always thought operations were kind of dry, like, oh, that's just like a bunch of paperwork and administrative stuff. And no, like it's all about finding the right people to like create magical synergy and then like build and uplift the project together and then have this attitude of like business agility, right? And kind of like changing and morphing and norming and whatnot as you go. So yeah, I seem to be blessed with sort of that sort of visioning free form element, and then also that like very operational, like very sort of meticulously designed like org structure stuff. So yeah,
An
that's how.
interesting combination of skills, for sure. No wonder you're so well suited to your work. So obviously, when you come into an environment, anybody who's worked with executives or C-suite people knows that these people often got where they are, not without just a little bit of ego involved or perhaps arrogance. So if you come into an organization and you're telling somebody, hey, maybe what you're doing is maybe wrong, do you get
Right.
pushback, or how do you deal with it? Do you have people who are very resistant to the kind of change that you bring to an organization?
I do. And there are a number of ways that I triage it. And that is kind of how I think of it. I don't think of it as like, here's a fire, I have to douse it with water, because that it kind of ends up feeling like an ego versus ego thing, and that doesn't go anywhere. But there's a little bit of, yeah, if I'm experiencing a highly resistant moment, or even like a combative moment, like some people try to attack a little bit if they feel defensive. I'm like, how do I triage this energy? That's always my question. And sometimes it is a symptom of the other person's, again, like anxiety, fear, minor or not so minor self-loathing, whatever their own stuff is that they haven't worked out, right? And I didn't make this up. Like plenty of people way smarter than me have like really documented the fact that most executives on some level are like playing out their own, like psychosocial drama, like in the work setting, right? So some of it is just like, does this person need a hug? You know what I mean? Like, does this person, maybe they need like a cookie and a nap,
Right.
And I mean, I'm being like a little silly in terms of how I phrase it, obviously, but like, we are all just human creatures. And on some level, yeah, there's a lot of like, oh my gosh, is this chick gonna like out me as being like not as woke or not as this or not as that as I like to think that I am? And certainly as, good, essentially, as like I want my team to see me as. And what happens with many people who are acclimated to being told that they're right, or to being like positively reinforced, is that they think that other people can't see or smell their crap, right? And that's just not true. Like human beings can feel when they're not sincere, can feel when they're sort of, trying to placate somebody or this or that. And it's not about getting it right. It's about just like developing a sort of okayness with like, yeah, my team can absolutely see the things I'm bad at. And they're never not going to be able to. It's not because I like haven't become perfect enough. It's just that's how humans are. So a lot of that work is like helping people just understand that others will be able to see their fallibility, their issues, their mistakes, their incongruency, whatever,
Yeah.
however you say that word.
Right.
Um, uh, yeah. So I find that to be fairly effective. And it disarms people too, because they're expecting to be either scolded or instructed. And I rarely do either of those things.
That makes so much sense. And yeah, of course, it's all fundamental. That's the interesting thing. It's like you can see, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist by any means, but you can see the way a lot of these things are rooted in childhood. Somebody
Yeah.
was bullied as a kid, and then they just have a vendetta against the world for the rest of their life. And even though some of these things are very easy to understand theoretically, it doesn't stop people from doing tremendous harm. And that's one of the great tragedies of the world. You can recognize
Yeah.
at a distance, you can say, oh, that person is a classic example of this. Clearly, they were bullied as a kid, or their parents didn't love them, or something awful happened as a kid. And now they just hate the whole world, or they take it out on the world, and they can rise to power. And maybe they rose to power because of that. And while I don't know these people personally, that's certainly the vibe that I get from like a Jeff Bezos type. It's like, come on, man. Like, can we drop it? Like, you did it. You won. Let it go.
Right.
Give back.
Yeah.
Give $1 billion
Yeah.
a day to something good. Like, you got a yacht the size of a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. Like, you won, buddy. Let the chip go. Same with like Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
Let the chip. Like, you have the whole island of Hawaii now, like an entire island in Hawaii. Let it go. But we see that it doesn't stop people, unfortunately. So it's fascinating that you're able. I mean, now obviously the people that you're working with, those are extreme examples. Wouldn't be that far gone, but. That's just one of those classic things in life where it's like you can witness something, you can know why it's happening, but it doesn't mean that that person is harmless. It doesn't mean that you can necessarily fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, very, very well put. I think that the one thing that I might kind of add on in terms of how I, negotiate, not just sort of working with executives, but working specifically with like diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging with executives, is that in my experience, and I have seen not all research, but like quite a bit of research that corroborates this, when it comes to white people specifically, they actually do better talking about race and ethnicity specifically with other white people. And, we can kind of postulate why that may be. My thinking, and again, sort of some of the research I've seen guesstimates that that's because on either conscious or subconscious level, folks think like, oh, well, I'm not going to be judged. Now, that's actually not true. Like, if I'm honest, because I'm human and I'm, full of crap all the time too, like I'm oftentimes judging them in my head, right? But I'm really, really good at my job. And so I don't let them know that, right? Mm-hmm. Like I still sort of hold space for that, like, admonition essentially. So some of what I do is like give people the opportunity to air their dirty laundry, which frankly, most people are like dying to do. They're like, right. Please somebody listen to like how messed up I am. Yeah. Like they want that. And so I've heard things that I personally like that turn my stomach. I've heard things that make me wildly uncomfortable, but I'm like, okay, I have the choice to either like respond kind of emotionally, or I can hold space for this, not to validate it again, but to kind of help morph it, like help them work through like, where did that narrative come from? Or like, why do you feel that way? Or like, what do you think you're serving in yourself or in your company by like holding on to that story? Like, what is that even behaving as? So it's sort of like there's like a transmutation going on. And like I said, that's specifically in terms of race and ethnicity. I also have found that in some ways, being identifying as a woman and, being like female presenting, I also find that oftentimes male executives feel safer talking to a woman. So there's, and again, not always, obviously there's exceptions to this, but there can be a tendency to feel like, okay, like I don't have to compete with her, and I'll like put on several different parts of my personality. If I need to, I'll puff up my chest and do the hi, I'm Dr. Murdock thing. Like I'm capable of doing that. Right. And I do that sometimes at like conferences and things like that if I need to, but I can also be like very warm and collegial and like, hey buddy, like we're all in this together, just tell me what's up. And I think that can actually really disarm a lot of male executives, frankly, and like help them feel like, oh, I don't have to compete with her. She's here to like, not literally hold my hand. That would be inappropriate, but like metaphorically hold my hand, know? So.
Yeah. And one of these themes that has always come up in my own life that I'm very fascinated with, and I've heard it said by many different people, is the idea of groups versus individuals. And again, as somebody who's traveled extensively, I've seldom met an individual in my whole life that I didn't connect with from any culture, any background. But George Carlin even talked about, like, I love an individual person. I hate groups of people because groups of people are stupid. They're tribal. They do all sorts of horrible things. When somebody says I belong to a group, then there's team and like it's us versus them, all of this. But so many individuals are hospitable when you get to know them. And I think Sacha Baron Cohen, as divisive as his work is, in his latest Borat, which has some pretty intense moments, he can meet with groups of people that have enormous hatred in their hearts as a group. But then two of the individuals put them up in their house and feed him to like hateful people. And it's there's this weird, and it's certainly true in America, but I think it's true around the world, where any individual will give you some food or a place to stay, or, you can talk, even if you quote unquote disagree about an enormous variety of topics, but then you put them in a group and it's a totally different thing. And there was a documentary some years ago that I was just really fascinated by. I can't remember what it's called, but there was a woman who, she dressed up like a man and she was able to look convincingly like a man, and she infiltrated. Do you recall what I'm talking about?
No, but like 10, love it.
It's awesome. You have to see it.
Yeah.
So she was able to look enough like a man that she convinced a group of people. She joined a bowling league. She became a man, and she had all of these preconceived notions about what men did and who men were. And then later she realized, but once they sort of accepted me, then I saw the other side of what it meant to be a man. And then I saw that within the bowling group, they cared about me, that they cared, that there was actually a kind of love there, but the love was just shown in a way that I was maybe not used to. But so she had this really crazy epiphany. It's an amazing story to find for anybody out there. But it's just that proof that on an individual level, when you talk like this, there's so much connection that can be done. But it's only when we say, I am this. I am part of this group. And I identify, and that's where things get dangerous. That's just my personal belief that I've noticed.
That's really interesting. And it reminds me a bit of, and unfortunately, I'm blanking on the names of the individuals I'm thinking of right now, but, case studies where we've seen people who have been part of like the KKK, for example, or other like sworn devotional hate organizations, right? And these people who leave, and they talk about sort of the difference between like getting absorbed in like the vortex of the groupthink versus like separating themselves out and having that agency to like ground themselves and understand what they actually stand for. So, I'm a huge, again, like collaborator, teamwork person, et cetera, but it is really crucial for everybody to like take the space to figure out what they stand for. And actually it's something I'll mention just because I did a training just the other day and folks at the end were asking me like, how do you navigate like the emotional part of this work? And, I meditate a lot. Like I have to like come back into myself, right? And that's actually like I literally schedule that out. That's not optional. That's part of my workday.
Yeah, that's really great. And I noticed that for myself as well, that if you're a critical person, if you have a sense of humor, it's easy to focus on what's wrong with the world. And it's very easy for me to be extremely disappointed in what I'm seeing all around me. Like Tiger King 2 just came out. I watched the preview and I'm like, oh my God, what reality are we living in that there is a Tiger King 2, that this man is a celebrity, that these people are celebrities? Like, what does that say about our culture that Tiger King is more popular than somebody who's bringing sanitation to, like, than fundamental global issues? And, so it's just always an interesting intersection for me when I see those kinds of things. But, I don't know. It plagues me, but I think that if we focus on the positives or what we like to see, that's a much harder thing to do. And in my own life, I had to make a transition. I did a satire thing for some time where I focused on critique because satire is a means of saying what you don't like in the world. But I had to change into asking myself, what would I actually like to see more of, which was a difficult question for me. And that was the origins of this podcast and my new mission, if you will, is it's easy for me to criticize Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, all of these people in power. But then I had to ask myself, what do I actually want to see more of? And that's how stories like this happen, conversations like this happen. It's like, what do I actually want the world to be like? It's an interesting switch, but that also came with a grounding or a reflection. I did meditate. I don't meditate as often as I should, but I think it is very important for people to ask themselves, especially now when all of these external forces dictate our lives, social media, algorithms control our lives. Everybody wants to be a celebrity. Everybody wants to be an influencer. Who is asking what else? Who is asking what else do they stand for? Yes, I stand for TikTok followers. Yes, I stand for easy money. But like, what else? Do you just want to die with 1 million followers? Is that it? If you had that and $1 billion, are you happy? Because there's countless examples of people who aren't happy who achieved all of those things and who die miserable. So what else do you believe in, and why do you believe in it is such a powerful question that I feel not many people are asking.
I mean, gosh, I love all of that. I think that's part of why you and I are so aligned, even if we have like slightly different, skills and sort of areas of expertise. Is one of the main things that we work on is like, when we help execs create better strategy, we're not like, great, how do we solve your problem this afternoon? I mean, sure, of course, there's a time and a place for that, particularly if it's an acute problem. We're like, how do we make you successful next week, next year, and 100 years from now? Like, we're really thinking like, what's the sort of framework of agility, yet just enough structure, just enough guideposts, just enough of a framework where you have tools, but you're also able to like slalom, as the terrain inevitably shifts, because there will be, whether, hopefully, knock on wood, not like another COVID, but there's going to be something, like I use that metaphorically, like another COVID, like it's going to happen, and we never know when, and we never know what. And, if one of our tasks as a human, I suppose, is to be present enough to ask those questions of like, what is the actual goal here? Like, are we really that obsessed with the KPI of like X number more followers? Or like, is it only about the numbers? And if so, like, are those a symptom of something else? Like, usually if you trace back the why, some of those methodologies that are like, just keep asking why, just keep asking why. You'll find the actual desire, right? And to me, like, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's part of what you're talking about. Like, yes, it's easy to critique. And that's why I fled the academy, if I'm totally honest, and much love to all of my academic friends and colleagues. I love them passionately and dearly, right? But it's like, I'm done critiquing for the sake of critiquing. Like, what do we desire and what are we moving toward? What do we stand for? What are we, full-throated and open-hearted, like building together? That to me is always going to be the better strategy than like, did we get 10% growth this quarter?
Right.
It's like, okay, like I'm literally.
Star. And then you end up as like Facebook. Then you end up as Facebook, where growth was literally the only meta, okay. Right? Where that's the only metric that was ever a factor. And who cares if hate? Who cares how we get there? But it's funny you mentioned about academia, because I had the exact same thing. Now, I went to a liberal arts college, a prestigious liberal arts college, and I studied English literature and film. And I was struck pretty early on in my studies that the professors were very smart, but I didn't feel that they were wise. And they were certainly smarter than me, but they had no core wisdom. There wasn't the why in terms of what they were doing. And it's like, Edgar Allan Poe wrote this essay, and here is, Jacques Lacan or Jacques Derrida, a critique of the essay that is longer than the essay itself, mind you. It's like here's a 3-page essay and a 10-page critique. And then you have somebody else saying Jacques Derrida completely missed the point, and here's a 15-page essay about why his critique of the work of art is wrong. You have a critique on a critique on a critique. Same with like Shakespeare, critique on a critique 100%. On a critique. And I'm like, who I love? I love Shakespeare. I love the guy who wrote these plays. I don't like the person who critiqued the critique of these plays. And you can get so caught up in that world where you say, what is the purpose of this? And it's like Shakespeare entertained a lot of people. Yeah. He brought stories to a lot of people. You're just sitting in a cave talking about it. And I've always felt that. And that was kind of in my mind when I flipped that switch on academia and I said, this is not for me. I need to go into the reality of building something, of creating something, of reaching people directly in some means. Yeah. And, again, that comes down to, what do you want to see in the world? What do you want to make? And I've always had more respect for those people who build things, because it's scary to build things. It's scary to create something. It's much easier to tear down, as they say, than it is to try to come up with a play or a poem or a song or a comedy routine that has an effect. Totally.
And you know what? And again, this is just my opinion, but I would say that you're very correct in terms of the world of business too. Like we've seen a bajillion case studies where, some company makes a name for themselves and money and this and that off of like XYZ product. And then they just like ride that product till the end of time. And then, 25 years later, when they're going out of business and like flailing around wildly, they're like confused about how they got there. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you're doing the same, you're looking back on the original creation and trying to like milk it past where it wants to be milked. That's a weird way of phrasing that, but
right.
It's like, I'm not saying forget the past. That's not what I mean, but it's like, honor the past, celebrate the past, be excited about the past, and harness that excitement and that energy towards innovation, towards doing even better. And I think where we really see leaders succeeding are people who, again, maybe don't take themselves super, super seriously. They're able to let go of some of that ego that you were referencing earlier, but they're like really committed to the innovation process. And they're like so stoked to see where the idea can go or like how the program can get better. And then, you know, somebody like you comes in with marketing, or somebody like me comes in with people in culture programming, and we're able to like invite them into forming something even better. And like that to me is total leadership, right? Like it's always about just constant improvement, constant improvement.
And that's what we see with charismatic leaders of the past, you know, Walt Disney or Steve Jobs. These charismatic leaders, there's a danger of people celebrating the past so much that they forget how the person that they're celebrating was originally found or what their ideas were. You know, these people got where they were by innovating, by challenging the status quo, not by holding on to some mythical vision of a past utopian society or past utopian business or whatever. Instead, it was a constant challenging of a constant questioning of how do we do things? Why do we do things? What are we doing? I do think that is a very big danger in any organization.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And it's, I mean, again, it's one of those things where it sounds very philosophical because I suppose I sort of discuss it, you know, high level like this when we're not getting into nitty gritty, you know, details, because I never want to disclose too much, right? If I'm totally honest. But I know, right? I'm like, that happens over a glass of wine, not in public.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
I'm like, but I don't know. I feel like there has to be a love again of innovation, or people will get stuck. Like there has to be a sense, like always, it's not about being dissatisfied, but there is like a real sense that things will inevitably, it's almost inevitable. Things will inevitably improve if we show up and we're present. And like, I don't know, I do find that mindset, it's so beautiful when I find it in companies, but I do find it to be relatively rare, actually. And I suppose that's why I have great job security.
Right. Exactly. That's what you're here for.
Yeah, totally. I don't know if that actually answered your question.
No, it does. I mean, we're just musing on a whole mess of philosophical things, but hopefully the listener will be able to piece some of it together, or they won't, and who cares? But anyways, we're approaching the end of our time together here. So a couple of rapid fire questions. First of all, how fulfilled are you, scale of 1 to 10, with your work?
Which side of the scale is which?
10 is most fulfilled.
Okay.
10 is I wake up every morning, birds are singing, I throw the covers off. I can't wait to skip to work like the boss from Jerry Maguire. Today's another great day. And 1 is I hate my life.
I hate my life. Okay. No, I would say 9. I love what I do, but I wish that I could get in a room with people a little bit more often. So hopefully, you know, post COVID, that will happen.
Okay. And another rapid fire question, something counterintuitive, something that you believe that nobody else believes, or a counterintuitive thing that you followed that helped you, that was against the grain.
Embodiment is a huge part of cerebral work. I don't care how somebody does that. You know, I mentioned meditation for myself, but there has to be some sort of like visceral integration. Or again, you get people who are like totally bifurcated. There's like one thing happening here and another thing happening here, and it doesn't go well.
Explain that. I need you to expand on that. What is embodiment in your mind? That's beautiful, but we can't end there.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, totally fair. So in my opinion, learning doesn't really happen through like words or concepts, which is hilarious because again, it's like I'm practically a professional philosopher, right? But it's like in order to really, really learn, there's an immersive process, and it happens like in our tissues. It's you know, new synapses forming and firing, right? There's like actual changes in our physiology. Like we're literally like developing new cells, and like different hormones are coursing through our veins. It's one of the reasons why I totally agree with you. Like travel is one of the best ways to learn. You cannot read about what it's like to be in Beijing and like have the experience as an American of like being, yeah, exactly. You're like nodding,
I'm shaking my head violently for our listeners. Like,
Right. Totally. And like the same thing happens with, diversification of teams. It's like this is not an intellectual exercise. It's like it's actually a different visceral experience to work with people who don't have the same worldview or lived experience as you. Like you will innovate differently. It's going to happen. I absolutely guarantee it. It's like you couldn't resist it if you tried, not that you would want to. So learning is absolutely about integrating into like physiology, into the body, into, like the senses, if you will.
That's a very awesome thought. And I completely agree with all of it. I never thought about it, but I completely agree with all of it. That's a great way to wrap it up. There's one thing that I want, though. Promote yourself real quick. You can have the last word here. So how can people get in touch or find you or support you or learn more about your work?
Okay. Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, just if you want to like get in touch and read some of my, self-indulgent blog posts, that would be www.Saramurdock. That's my name, drsaramurdock.com. I'm also on Instagram at the same exact thing. That started out as an experiment, if I'm totally honest. And I'm now like, hey, this is kind of fun. I should, actually like try to put some of my stuff out there. So same thing, Dr. Sara Murdock on Insta. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well at SARAEVA. That's my middle name, Sara Eva Murdock. And I love connecting with other humans. So hit me up.
Sounds great. I have to say before we wrap this up that your name is so awesome. It reminds me of like a 90s action movie, like Dr. Sara Murdock. Oh. It feels like McBain from The Simpsons or something.
I mean, listen, Daredevil is Matt Murdock. So I just
maybe that's like, what I was. Yeah, it's like there's something in there that I'm resonating with. That is awesome. Well, thank you very much, Sara. I really appreciate you taking the time. And with that, the official podcast is over.
Awesome.